We don't have $5,000, Lauren. Those words still echo in my mind, sharp and cold, the kind that make your chest tighten. I was facing eviction, staring at the terrifying thought of sleeping in my car, and yet just minutes later, my family was handing that exact amount to my sister for a luxury vacation. That single moment cracked open memories I had buried for years, revealing a life where love always felt transactional and my usefulness had a price. Let me tell you how it all unfolded. I was 16 when the idea of being strong first became my burden. Most kids my age were worried about prom dresses or geometry tests, but I was staring at a red notice on the power bill, my stomach twisting in knots. My father, Jonathan, had thrown his paycheck into a business venture that turned out to be a scam, and my mother, Diana, too embarrassed to ask for help, left me with the responsibility of keeping the lights on. After school, I picked up double shifts at the diner hands, raw from scrubbing dishes, arms aching from carrying trays. Each evening, I counted the coins in my envelope, ones and fives, $340 in tips, and handed it over so that our home wouldn't plunge into darkness. Meanwhile, my sister Jessica's world felt untouched by worry. That same week, she was starting private ballet lessons, $200 a month, her tiny feet dancing over polished floors while I raced to balance bills and shifts. I remember asking my mother how we could possibly afford it when the electricity was on the verge of being cut. She looked at me with those wide, untroubled eyes and said, "Jessica needs her art. It's her escape. You're strong enough to handle the reality. She isn't." I carried those words like armor. I believed that being strong was a badge of honor, proof that I could withstand the weight of the world. I didn't yet understand that strong was just the word my parents used to label what was exploitable. A signal that I could be relied upon to solve problems, to sacrifice to be invisible, but indispensable. My worth wasn't measured in affection or praise. It was measured in dollars, in hours, worked in the quiet resignation of the girl who never complained. Every day was a delicate negotiation with exhaustion. I would wake before dawn to cram homework in the quiet slip into the diner in a uniform that smelled faintly of bleach and coffee, and work until the neon lights buzzed overhead in the evening. My friends called me for movies or weekend plans, but I declined, my hands too raw, my mind too full of calculations. Each tip I earned, each shift I survived was another stitch, holding together the fragile fabric of our household, a fabric that felt like it could unravel at any moment. I remember the dinners, too cold, hurried meals, while Jessica spoke of recitals or new outfits. Her voice, the carrying dreams that I had learned to mute within myself. I would smile, nod, and pretend my hunger was invisible, as if acknowledging it would admit failure. It was during those moments, listening to her chatter, that I began to see the pattern, though I didn't yet name it. Love in my family seemed conditional, always tied to what I could give, what I could solve, what I could pay for. I wasn't hated. I was useful. And there's a subtle cruelty in being useful, because being useful never earns you warmth. It just earns expectation. By the time I finally collapsed into bed at night, my body exhausted and my hands sticky from detergent, I understood something about life that most teenagers don't. Being strong didn't mean freedom or empowerment. It meant being a quiet engine that kept everything else running. My sister danced. My father chased ill-fated investments. My mother looked serene and composed, and I counted coins, balanced bills, and silently stitched together the threads of our survival. Each act of strength was an act of invisibility, a confirmation that my existence was measured not in who I was, but in what I could do for others. At 22, I had just crossed the threshold of adulthood in the world I had fought to navigate. I was the first in my family to graduate college diploma in hand dreams of independence, glimmering on the horizon. A $2,000 signing bonus landed in my bank account, and I imagined using it for a deposit on my first apartment, a space that would finally feel like mine. But before I could even breathe, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, head buried in his hands, eyes hollow with worry. He had maxed out a credit card and was terrified it would derail the family's refinancing plans. No demands were made, only a quiet despair that settled over the room like smoke. Of course, I wrote the check. I saved the house. And 2 months later, my parents bought my sister Jessica a brand new car because she was stressed about taking the bus to her part-time job. It was the same pattern I had known since childhood. My efforts, my sacrifices, my life on hold while the privileges I longed for were doled out to someone else. I remember sitting on the floor of my freezing Chicago apartment. Later that month, the weight of the world pressing against my shoulders, realizing with a mix of exhaustion and clarity that I had spent my entire life believing that love and approval could be earned through utility. Every payment, every favor, every sleepless night I endured was a deposit I hoped would secure my place in their hearts. The emotional toll had been accumulating quietly, like water dripping into a cup too small to hold it. I had learned to suppress frustration and disappointment, to tuck my dreams into the corners of my mind where they wouldn't be touched. Independence had always been just out of reach, slipping further away each time a parental crisis called me back into action. I became the invisible safety net, the unspoken solution, and in the quiet I recognized the cruel arithmetic of my existence. I was valued, not for who I was, but for what I provided. Looking back, those years at 22 crystallized the realization I had been piecing together for a decade. My parents had never asked for help out of necessity. They asked because they expected me to deliver. They had trained me to anticipate their emergencies, to suppress my own needs, and to accept exploitation as love. And I had complied every time, hoping that my quiet labor might one day be enough. But the truth was always there, hiding in plain sight. My worth had never been about me, only about the utility I could provide to them. I sat on the floor of my freezing Chicago apartment, the chill creeping through my jeans and into my bones, staring at the bank notification for my sister's vacation. It wasn't just a moment of betrayal, it was the revelation of a lifetime of patterns I had tried to ignore. Every sacrifice, every double shift, every late night spent patching together bills had been repayment for an unspoken contract I could never fulfill. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't even a person in their eyes. I was an appliance expected to function silently, to keep everything running while others thrived. The realization hit like ice in my veins. Hate would have required passion, attention, care. I felt none of it. Only expectation, only utility. And in that cold, silent apartment, I understood that I had run out of capacity to provide. I had nothing left to give. I stood slowly, feeling the stiffness in my legs from hours of sitting, and the decision crystallized with a clarity I hadn't experienced before. I wasn't calling them. I wasn't sending a text. I wasn't leaving breadcrumbs for their convenience. I grabbed 2 suitcases, choosing only what I could carry in my own hands. furniture dishes, photographs, symbols of the life I had built and tried to tether to their approval were left behind. I packed the essentials, clothes, a few personal mementos, the little things that were mine. The hallway was silent except for the scrape of my suitcase wheels against the concrete. The air outside was sharp with March cold biting at my cheeks and slipping through my coat. I inhaled, tasting freedom mixed with fear, and slipped into the driver's seat of my old car. The engine rattled and groaned as I turned the key, but I didn't care. The rumble beneath me was a heartbeat, a declaration that I was moving, that I was choosing myself. Over a lifetime of exploitation, I didn't know where I was going, only that I was leaving. Each street I navigated felt like a strip of possibility, a map without boundaries, a horizon I hadn't dared to imagine. The city lights flickered past, casting reflections on the dashboard that danced like fragments of a life I had almost forgotten I could claim. I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and terror, the kind that comes from walking away from the only version of yourself someone else has ever defined. With every mile, the weight of expectation lifted slightly. I was cold, I was uncertain, and yet for the first time in years, I felt the subtle pulse of autonomy beneath the fear. I wasn't a utility anymore. I wasn't disposable. I was a person stepping into a life I could finally shape for myself, free from the invisible chains that had bound me since I was 16. After that cold night, the world felt vast and uncertain, but I stumbled into a corner of it that would change everything. Thomas and Elizabeth Sullivan appeared quietly in my life. Strangers who refused to see me as broken or expendable. The first time they invited me to dinner, I was cautious, skeptical of kindness that carried no expectation. Their attention wasn't measured in what I could provide or solve. It was measured in curiosity and care and questions about who I was rather than what I did. They asked about my reading, my ambitions, even my opinion on the terrible diner coffee I had been drowning in for years. That night stretched into hours, and for 2 solid hours, I wasn't the utility child, the girl who counted coins to keep a house standing. I was just Lauren, existing without obligation, allowed to occupy space simply because I was. They returned the following week for coffee, and soon it became Sunday dinners at their estate, and then a rhythm of presence that I had never known could exist without conditions. Thomas, a corporate titan accustomed to buying and selling companies, became an unlikely mentor. I remember the evening I admitted my fear of negotiating a raise. He looked at me, eyes steady, and said, "Lauren, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you leverage." The lesson was simple in words, but revolutionary in effect. For the first time, I understood that compensation, recognition, and even respect could be claimed, not begged for. Elizabeth, on the other hand, demonstrated love without strings attached. When I caught the flu and panicked about offering to pay for groceries, she laughed softly and tucked me in. "Honey," she said, "you can't buy a mother's worry. It's free." Those words settled in me, softening years of armor and self-imposed burden. And then there was Daniel, their son, who entered my life without fanfare, returning from a business trip in London one Christmas. I was helping Elizabeth hang ornaments when he walked in and simply stopped observing the quiet independence I'd cultivated. There were no cinematic declarations or dramatic moments, only a recognition, steady and calm, that my autonomy was not a challenge to be managed, but a foundation to be respected. Over the 5 years that followed, the Sullivans didn't just befriend me, they rebuilt me. Every dinner, every conversation, Every gentle correction and guidance became bricks, and a foundation I hadn't realized was crumbling beneath me. Thomas pushed me to claim my worth professionally. Elizabeth taught me to accept care without guilt. Daniel, in his quiet way, showed me that intimacy could coexist with independence, that relationships could be mutual rather than transactional. With each lesson, I learned that family was not merely blood, but choice, loyalty, and love enacted daily. The slow, steady rhythm of their support reshaped my understanding of connection. I started to trust that I could exist for myself, that my needs mattered, that I was not defined by utility alone. The Sullivans became a living proof that the world held spaces for care, that some hands reached not for profit, but for presence, and that it was possible to be seen, heard, and valued purely for being. In their company, I began to unlearn the patterns that had governed my life, and slowly to envision a version of myself that belonged to no one but me. The day I held the petition for adult adoption in my hands was surreal. I was 29, signing a document that would sever the last legal ties to Diana and Jonathan, cutting away the strings they had used to manipulate me for decades. Thomas had explained the process carefully. The law didn't care about age. It only cared that the ties were broken in the eyes of the state, giving me permanence, protection, and the name Sullivan. I felt a weight lift, even as my heartbeat quickened, realizing that this piece of paper was more than legal. It was armor I had needed since I was 16. But the relief was short-lived. A week later, Thomas asked me to meet with his attorney, Mr. Vance, to finalize the financial separation from my biological parents. I expected a formality, a simple notary stamp. Instead, I found a man with a face that had discovered bodies in trunks, surrounded by towering stacks of papers. His voice was calm, almost eerie, as he explained that in preparing the documents, a standard audit revealed discrepancies in my parents' tax filings linked to my social security number. My stomach dropped. I opened the folder to find years of IRS returns, and then my eyes locked on the devastating detail I was listed as permanently and totally disabled, claimed as their dependent for 10 years, while simultaneously being alive, working, paying taxes, and struggling to survive. Mr. Vance laid it out with precision-forged medical documents. State stipends collected $150,000 stolen over a decade, all while I labored unknowingly to support a life they didn't include me in. The scale of manipulation was staggering, and the implications legally were clear wire fraud, tax fraud, identity theft. I could have sent them to prison immediately, but the thought of them playing the victim to extended family and turning the situation into a narrative of vindictive daughter made me pause. The power was mine, but the strategy had to be precise. I decided not to act rashly. Instead, I would orchestrate a confrontation that allowed me to maintain control. I invited them to the wedding knowing full well they assumed a bribe or payoff would secure my compliance. The day arrived with flawless weather, the Sullivan estate gleaming under the sun, a fortress of white roses and silk ribbons, while the world celebrated with senators, moguls, and celebrities. My focus was on the gates. At 2:15, their luxury sedan rolled up. Diana shimmered in a gold gown, Jonathan in an ill-fitted tuxedo, both moving like predators expecting their prize. They hadn't been invited, and yet here they were, believing the event itself guaranteed them leverage. They were escorted directly to Thomas's private library, a soundproof room, a space with no audience. I felt a rush of anticipation and clarity. This was the culmination of years of careful observation, preparation, and self-preservation. Thomas Elizabeth and Mr. Vance were poised around me as I watched Diana and Jonathan step inside. The heavy doors closed behind them, isolating the moment from the world, and I realized that I was no longer a passive participant. I was in command. For the first time, I held the legal, emotional, and moral high ground, ready to confront their greed, their manipulation, and their delusions of entitlement. Looking back, the journey from being invisible and exploited to finally claiming my life feels surreal. Blood didn't define my family. Those who stood with me, nurtured me, and respected my independence did. With the Sullivans, I found safety, love, and belonging, while my biological parents faced the consequences of their choices. I signed the last papers, closed the door, and stepped fully into my life. It's a reminder that family can be chosen, and sometimes choosing yourself is the bravest.